Eduardo, good afternoon here in Europe. Good morning, South America. You're in Colombia. Thank you very much for joining War as Reset, this new web series that I started a month ago, actually 45 years ago, when the war in Ukraine started, when Ukraine was invaded by the Russian troops. Many wish the pandemic was nothing more than a bad dream, a nightmare. The truth is that it is still a reality for most of the world's population as we speak. Many wish the Russo-Ukrainian war was nothing more than a bad dream. According to psychoanalysis, nightmares can only disappear when their meaning is represented. Why my wish to have this conversation on conflicts, on war? It is for two reasons, because I think we Jungians can really bring our tools out when there is a conflict, when there is tension, and we have something to say. It is a moral duty to say what we have to say, but also because I noted not just now, but also during the COVID pandemic and before that, we need more and more depth. If we watch TV, if we watch, if we listen to radio, or even if we're in newspaper, there is not enough depth. And news, the same news continue to be shared, and one day there are 10 deaths, the day after 20, the third day 30, so it's more sensationalism than in depth. So I really hope that following Andrew Samuel, who actively demonstrated how useful and effective perspective derived from psychotherapy might be in the formation of policy, in new ways of thinking about the political process and the resolution of conflict. Otherwise, we end up only eating war and taking war as an attraction. You are Venezuelan. You live in Colombia since 12 years. What is war?
Well, first of all, thank you, Stefano, very much for this invitation. I think that this is spaces for reflect about mankind, about human being, and about our dynamics are very, very important. And I think that the name that you choose for these conversations, War as Reset, it's a very intuitive way to start the conversation, because I think that war is something that you can see it like a cyclic thing, some kind of autoregulatory dynamic that we can escape from it. As a Latin American, we have saw for many years the difficulty of try to live together in some symmetrical way, and how the conflicts are our everyday situation. The conflict and the confrontation, it's all around us in our everyday life. So I think that what the psychological and in particular the Jungian perspective give us is some kind of invitation to see this phenomena in a psychological attitude. No, it's like, well, how can we put all these difficult things in a way that we can saw it in a more holistical way, and in a more like a complete way. I have thought for many years the conflict that the Jungian psychoanalysts have to try to figure out people in an individual perspective and in the collective perspective. And that's very important, because in a way that put us in the difficulty of trying to see a human being in a multi-axis way. The rational thought has a linear way, so you have to choose to see it in an individual way or in a collective way, but try to put it in a multi-axial system and try to understand how the different phenomena goes on is very, very important. And I think that word is one of them. And in particular, this word, the Ukrainian Russian War, because you can see many people has tried to find the similarities between World War II and Hitler and this war and Putin. And I think that trying to make the reflection exercise, you can see that there are two dynamics, very, very different dynamics. In World War II, you have one man that was possessed, for what we can say in Jungian way, as an archetypal of savior archetype, that was in a way answering all the collective pain and wound about the humiliation that they have after the war. But in this moment, you can there is some kind of propaganda between, well, this kind of Russia trying to be again together, but in a way you can see that this is the thought of one man that in a way hasn't for him it has been very, very difficult to try to share, to command all the thing of all the country. I think that's why he thought that it will be a very, very easy way to start something and to again to annex Ukrainian to Russia. And what he wasn't expect is that the Ukrainian people starts like fighting the way that they have fighting for their independence, because they don't feel like a part of Russia, and also how the people of Russia they don't understand what's going on. It's like you can see the thought of one individual, the individual thought that is not matching with the collective. That it was very, very difficult from the starting of World War II, where the thought of one individual matched with all the collective, and it was very easy to start like some kind of the field of word. That it's like the activation of some kind of field of word that in a very easy way starts like eating and eating and eating all the surroundings. It's not what's happening right now.
Let's go deeper on this point, because it would have been one of my next questions, but I'm happy to link to it. I find similarities from World War II and this war on Ukraine. It's very interesting what you say. It's the wish of a man in World War II as a consequence or compensation of World War I. Hitler was, and actually, as Jung underlines in After the Catastrophe, Hitler's mirror the people, or the people mirror in Hitler put him on power. In fact, he was elected. But now there is a discrepancy between the leader and the people. I have proposed in my previous interviews that could be about compensation, but it's also about the concept of father and fatherland. I propose this to our colleagues. I propose that when one is ashamed of his father, when a man is ashamed of his father, like Freud or Jung, for example, who thought their father was a hero, but actually they were embarrassed by the father at some point, they decided to become heroes themselves. I wonder whether our daughters and sons now that are embarrassed of us actually run away from us. Yeah, you embarrass me, I leave you. No, in that case, Jung and Freud, possibly Hitler, possibly Putin, although not his own biological father, but the metaphysical father, Yeltsin, Gorbachev, even Lenin, as he blamed Lenin. Ashamed for the end of the Soviet Union, the collapse of his country, of his reality brought him to this attack. It's not the first attack. Before there was Georgia, there was Ukraine 2006, 2008, although not directly, but with the election of Yanukovych-Yanushenko, there was Maidan. What is this all about?
Yes, I think that's a very important question and a very interesting question, because from my point of view, if we follow Erich Neumann like evolutionary line, that is very, I think we don't know about too much about Erich Neumann model and system. I think that Erich Neumann, with all the Jung system, in a way has a very special match to help us to see humankind and to see dynamics in a multi-dimensional and multi-actual way. One of the things that Neumann proposed, that I think is very interesting, is that ontological evolution follows a phylogenical evolution. And I think in a way we can see it in the other way. So we can see the phylogenetical evolution in the same way that we can see the ontogenical evolution. In trying to see the story of humankind, we are right now in a crisis in which all the patriarchal is. We are asking a lot of questions about patriarchal, and the patriarchal state is in an unstable moment and apparently trying to go to another place. You can see it in all the feminist movements and all the globalization, the way to think about the way to think about to see us of a group, a communal group, and I think that's very important, because it's like the patriarchal that was very stable for hundreds of years. It starts to move, and it's trying to move to another thing. So asking people to go again to the patriarchal state is some kind of regressional movement. And I think that because of the globalization right now, that's not so easy. Maybe in other moments, the call for going again to the patriarchal, going again to the hero, going again to the leader was a little bit easier. Right now, with all the globalization in which not only the collective unconscious is like more near to every one of us, but also the collective consciousness is in a way moving also, and we have some kind of reference in our imaginary that are very different. So it's not easy just to go into a call for a heroic like position or attitude, because right now that kind of heroism is a little bit more weak. It's not that as in another moments that we are looking for strong leaders that represent us and that can fight for us in any dynamic. Right now, we have some kind of a globalization, consciousness in which every one of us have some kind of participation. And well, what we're trying to do is an expression, some kind of an expression of that, in which, well, two individuals from two different parts of the world can sit and try to reflect and think that this can be important and that this can be something that we can add to the discussion in a global way. In other moments that will be impossible, because, well, just all the the very, very special people will have the opportunity to sit down and to reflect in some kind of organisms, very hierarchic and a very like a power linear structure. Nowadays, we are more like symmetrical, and I think that it could be some kind of compensation force that we are going right now, because not all the people is in this are sharing this point of view. There's a lot of people there that instead in the power field in which hierarchic, in which a vertical structure are very present. But that also there right now there's a lot of people that live, think, and have the experience of a more horizontal, symmetrical dynamics. And it's very important because nowadays, with the globalization of the communication, you can see these two kinds of collective interacting one with the other one, and you can see a lot of points to a point of view very different that are trying to talk one to the other, and in a way it's a compensatory movement that for me is very very new in humankind.
Let me share with you what James Hillman wrote about war. He said that there is no practical solution to war because war is not a problem solvable by the practical mind, which is better equipped for its conduct than for its avoidance or conclusion. War belongs to our soul and as an archetypal truth of the cosmos. It is a human work and an inhuman horror, and a love that no other love has been able to overcome. We can open our eyes to this terrible truth and, becoming aware of it, devote all our passionate intensity to undermining the enactment of war, strengthened by the courage that culture possesses, even in the Dark Ages, to continue to sing as it resists war. We can understand it better, postpone it longer, work to gradually remove it from the support of a hypocritical religion, but the war as such will remain until the gods themselves leave.
There's one line to stay with me there. I think it's very important that we are trying to, well, we not, but the people, the human being are trying to control in a rational way a lot of very, very primordial forces that we have. Here in Colombia, for example, in one, well, many people know that in Colombia, we have a war conflict for more than 50 years, okay? That has been, well, put all the country upside down. And in a very important like initiative, a group of politicals, they start a movement to declare peace. And one of the discussions that I have with some of them is that you cannot just say, well, and now we are in peace. Well, after 50 years of conflict, 50 years.
You are referring to the conflict between the Farc and the state.
Yes, all the guerrilla and the state. Okay, it's not only the Farc. There's some kind of guerrilla movements that we have over here. And well, there were some kind. Well, I have a lot of interpretations about why the leaders of each part they decided to have this kind of situation. But the real thing is they declare peace. Okay, and what happened
would be, instead of war as reset, peace as reset.
Yes, and I think that it's the same thing. So we are always moving between war and peace, always. And I think that the very important thing is that nowadays we still don't have a solution for that. There's something what James Hillman was telling us. Now, there is a lot of very rational and primordial forces that is in the collective unconscious, and they're pulsing for going out of them to express themselves. And in a way, we are trying to do a very rational work, a very rational, work to try to be more human beings and more compensated or more stable. But those forces still are living within us and are pulsing for going us. And I think that the thing is, how can we maintain the exercise and the work to try to learn about those forces and try to incorporate those forces to our conscious in the individual way and in the collective way. There's a lot right now. You can see a lot of movements about enlightenment and evolutionary and consciousness, but most of it, all of them are invited to do an individual work in a way to have a collective effect. But the effect, the collective situation is that exercise, that consciousness about those forces that we have are very, very, we are very far from being for touching at them or for trying to incorporate them. So in a way, they are very, very like free over there. And every conflict inevitably makes that those forces appears, and the first manifestation of that is polarization. That's we can avoid that. If you and I have some kind of difference, the first situation is that we polarize. Well, Stefano has one point of view and I have another point of view, and I will start defending mine and you will start defending yours. And it's the only way to get out of the conflict is try to say, well, let me just try to see what Stefano is trying to tell me, or let me try to see what Stefano is thinking about. If that moment it doesn't appear, it's most difficult.
War again. There will be war
again.
What you're saying is war doesn't have to be declared. In fact, the Russians didn't declare war. Yeah, war is an attack, and it brings with itself consequences that are very well known. At the same level, peace cannot be declared. It's naive, I would say it's naive to declare peace. We watch so many people say there must be peace. No, I'm against war. I would like peace, but I'm against war. I was marching in spring 2003 in London against the war in Iraq, but I was not marching for peace. I was marching against war. Why? Because when it starts, it's unstoppable. But we have to work for peace to reach a state of peace and the perpetuation of peace. That is, as Father Giuseppe Bettoni said a couple of days ago, it's lifelong work. He was asking, also following what the Pope said, everyone now is running to rearm, to spend double, the triple. Germany will become the third biggest war power after China and the US. And this is historically important because what happened 100 years ago. What about instead of spending, and I know it's naive what I'm saying, but spending in warfare, we should invest more in peace fare and not only leave this to the civil society. And I say this with you because you live in Colombia. You just mentioned a 50 years conflict, a civil conflict, and the Russia-Ukrainian can also be seen as a civil conflict between brother and sister, cousin. But you are Venezuelan. You're from Venezuela. where Venezuela is one of the richest countries in the world. But because of the dictatorship, allow me to say it has become one of the poorest.
Yes.
Why do we get to that point? Because yes, then we look back at the Frankfurt School and they were right about power. Or Erich Fromm, he wrote in 1941 that when we are not able to take the responsibility linked to our own freedom, we give this responsibility to someone, a politician, that automatically will become an authoritarian, not an authoritative, an authoritarian person, because we don't want that responsibility. So she has to take the responsibility. But it's mainly he, because there are very few she. And then I will have also a question about what is war, male or female, but what about power?
I think the power is one of the drives that human have all day long. I think that we have to be very conscious of our drive of power and be very conscious about how power, in a way, affect us, every one of us. In one situation, I said to a group, if you think that power is not important, it's because you haven't been in the field of power. When you are in the field of power, what you feel is very, very important. And to try to just go out of the field of power and enter in another field is not so easy. First, because again, the field of power is very, very, very strong. And the other side of the coin is, okay, if I'm going out of the field of power, in which field I will go in which one, and will be the benefits about going into another field. I think that what happens in this kind of countries in which you have one leader that is attached to power in a endless way is because they are very, very afraid. The first thing is that they don't want to feel anything different. But the other thing is, okay, they're afraid about, if I just let this go, where this all the country, the collective, or myself will going into, and it's not easy. In Jungian psychology, we have talked a lot of time. There is a lot of congresses about the balance between power and eros, but it's not so easy to talk about eros when you have a lot of collectives and a lot of situations that they don't know what does means, or they don't know what does has to, that it how to experience it, because we are used to be in a power field. Again, following Neumann and following the evolutionary story of humankind, we had been for hundreds of years under the patriarchal field that is stabilized in a power field in which father has the authority, and father has the power to declare, to do things, or to manage all the family, or to manage all the relationships. And to start like feeling, to start like touching again the feeling feel is not so easy, because I think that the feeling feel has to do with the feminine, and has to do with mother. And in a way is, how can we rescue again a balance between the feminine energy, or the feminine field, and the masculine energy, or the masculine field. And here arises a question that has to do with war, because war, in a way, we can see it, or we can identify it like a man issues, is some kind of masculine issues. And I think that that's a very important way to see what can we do to be more near to peace. And as you say, we can we can work against war, but how can we go to be more near to peace? And I think that right now we have a lot of movements, of collective movements that are asking for that and are proposing that, how the different energies had to move and in a way has to balance themselves, and thinking or hoping that in that the result of that balance will be more a more stabilized mankind.
It's interesting for me to notice what is happening with this series. I've done, I think, 8, 9 interviews. One with a woman, Caterina Vezzoli, and 8, 9 with men. Not because I'm only asking men and Caterina Vezzoli. I maybe ask much more women. But the approach of women is, let's wait a bit. Let me think about it. Which the male approach, a male of whatever gender and sex, of course, is let's do it. I wonder whether there is also an approach to how we live life, of course, psychologically, and how we deal with this kind of situation, to step in, a man, and find a solution or act, while women approach, again, of whatever sex and gender, because we can also say that a male, sex male, as you said, a feminine attitude that is nourishing, motherly, instead of the male aggressivity that jump into it. So I find it very interesting. And of course, this follows the discourse of Svetlana Alexievich, Nobel Prize for Literature, who described war as masculine. She was not the only one. But why is war so attractive? I propose that war is the opposite than what Truman Capote said, a Vanity Fair. Actually, war is atrocity fair. But following Freud, war is in our nature, with the tribe, with the instinct of aggressivity. We get polarized, we switch on TV almost 24 hours. We need to eat, to ingest in a bulimic way, and then to vomit, to keep ingesting again these images. But why are we so attracted by war?
Yes, I don't know if we can put it in an anthropological way. No, I think that, well, there is a lot of studies of the in the psychological and neuroscientist field. They talk that we are still, our brain, our nervous system are still attached to some kind of survival attitude in the world. And that is the way that we have survived for, thousands of years. And I think that in a way, when we are very near to the aggressive instinct, we are very near, we feel in a way like we are safe. It's like, well, if I can see and I can recognize my enemy, in a way I can be safe because I can or run or going or neutralize the enemy. So I think the moment in which we touch with the aggressive field that has to do with war, it starts like all a dynamic, an internal dynamic there is for me that we have repressed for because of our education, and that at the moment that we free them is some kind of relief. I had been amazed about the images of sadism and cruelty that we see all around with all the images of this Ukrainian Russian war. And for my surprise, I was the first time that I was like seeing them, I said, well, in a way, this could be some kind of we can relate it with the tragic images when for Greeks the tragedy was a compensatory way to move and to live, in which when you see the horror, in a way, the horror images, in a way, they just like break you, or they stop you. They could stop you or could break you. And at the moment they start this horror and this, it's like, well, we are going going into the field of tragedy. But for my surprise, what I have seen is the banalization of tragedy and the banalization of horror. It's like Anne Arendt said about the banalization of evil. No, it's like, well, we as you say, we are like Buddhism. We are eating and eating and eating. It's, images very of cruelty and sadism. And in a way, we are not, we don't have the way to register them. It's like we have a dissociation between our feeling and the way that we are receiving all these images.
And this is why first day, war, second day, war, third day, after 40 days, again, war is also defense. But I wonder whether this war is about the end of spirituality, or a world without spirituality, so a world that is linear, a world where individuals want to become someone and are individualistic instead of understanding that they have to become themselves, therefore individuated. I think, or my feeling is that this is what Jung was saying at the beginning of Wotan, Collective Work 10, passages 371 and 372. Let me read. When we look back at the time before 1941, we find ourselves living in a world of events which would have been inconceivable before the war. We were even beginning to regard war between civilized nations as a fable, thinking that such an absurdity would become less and less possible in our rational, internationally organized world. And what came after the war was a veritable witches' Sabbath. But in the sphere of religion, we can see at once that some very significant things have been happening. We need feel no surprise that in Russia, the colorful splendor of the Eastern Orthodox Church have been suspended by the movements of the godless. Here he refers to the Red Revolution, Lenin. And however deplorable the low spiritual level of the scientific reaction, it was inevitable that 19th century scientific enlightenment should one day dawn in Russia. I've read this many times, but today, during our conversation, and thanks to what we are sharing, I was able to say, maybe war, every time there is war, is a lowering of individuation, of becoming yourself as an individual and collective, and a raising of individualism, becoming someone. And when this happens, the spiritual, not the religious, but the spiritual is lacking.
Yes. And I think that is a very crucial thing, a crucial theme about what's going on and what we are living in all these years. Because one of the main things of postmodernism is the individualistic attitude. And I think that one of the consequences of this individualistic attitude is a godless way to live. It's like, well, the ego becomes the great God, no? And with the great God, we lost the rituals, the spiritual rituals. We lost. We have a lack of relation with our spiritual dimension. Again, with all the globalization and the interactions that we have with a lot of collectives, I think that's very, very hard try to deny the spiritual dimension of human being. I think that more and more and more we are more in touch with that spiritual dimension, not like a concept, not in an abstract way, not as a dogma, but is as an experience. I think that, well, most of it's not my thinking. I think there's a lot of people that think that for Jung, that was pivotal in all his work, his connection with the spiritual dimension. And we can see that he has a very, very strong way to channel that spiritual dimension, to express it, to manifest it. And but he has also this very, very strong tool to make it rational. No, so he can put it in words, he can put it in theories, but he has a strong connection with that spiritual dimension. I think that in the way that we are more and more in touch with that spiritual dimension, the way to balance and to regulate as collectives can be more and more possible. Because in the way, again, if we declare that there is not God, as that Russia that Jung was talking about, in which all the Marxism thinking, they decided, well, there's not God, the religion or the opium of the people, etc., etc. And we start like doing the difference between spirituality and religion. Religion, again, as a system that also can be a very powerful, a system that can very, very easy goes into the field of power. Spirituality is another thing. It's again the connection with the numinosum, is again the connection with the mysterium, is the connection with another field that when we are open to hear it, it starts like a regulatory movement, a regulatory dynamic that is very, very important, and particularly in the way that the individuals start to relate one with the other one, because we can see the other in a symmetrical way, we can see the other in an empathetical way, we can see the other as part of me. In a way, we can start like going into what, well, Erwin Laszlo and a lot of physics and a lot of people are talking about, this kind of wholeness in which we are living. No, it's the consciousness of wholeness, and in the way that we can develop that conscious of wholeness, I think that the opportunity to start wars or to maintain wars it can be more and more difficult. Because in that way, well, that's what's going, I'm going part of this. If we have a little thought about the consequences of this war, economical consequences, psychological consequences, political consequences, well, the only answer about what's going on with us is we are mad. We are in a psychotic state of, well, we are.
And this brings me to my next question. Usually I ask, is it useful, is it inappropriate to psychopathologize, to diagnose Putin? I don't want to ask you this question about Putin, but for example, Maduro, Uribe on the Colombian side, was the former president, Chavez, or previous dictators or guerrilla fighters that decided to step in favor of one side or the other. Jung used to say that actually the psychopath and the CEOs have the same brain, let's say, the same characteristic. Is it appropriate or not to psychopathologize a leader? The Americans did it with Trump. The British did it with Boris Johnson. We did it with Berlusconi, with Salvini. Is it useful?
I think it is. I think that I'm not a really fan of psychopathologize everything. I'm not fan of that. But I think that psychopathology give us a frame to try to understand and try to reflect about what's going on. I think it's a symptom of of our time, the characteristics of our leaders, of political leaders, because most of them, they have very psychopathic traits. Most of them are very individualism. Most of them are very death about the team that surround them. Most of them, in different moments, you can say they are not thinking in the people they are leading. They are thinking themselves. And that's a contradiction. How can you have a leader that is also that's only thinking about what he believes and what he wants, and not leading in to the community, to the collective? Again, I think that in the way that Greeks saw and lived the political, it's for me, it's amazing. Again, well, we think that we have a progression in the humankind, and in the progression in political and economical and in a lot of fields. But in the leader way that we are, in the way that we are living, our leaders, and we are voting for our leaders, and we are choosing our leaders, I think that we are in front of a symptom that it's very important to ask us of collective, what's going on here? Because in a way, it's like we are like choosing by some kind of charisma, no, some kind of the max, the persona, the psychopath persona they are showing us, and in a way we're holding to them and after the votation, after they start like their government, we start like seeing, well, what's going on? It's like a surprise. And we can see that in all the countries around Latin America. It's like, well, they vote for Chavez, and after the destruction of a country, but because it's a destruction of the country, a lot of people, well, what was that? We saw it in the last presidents of Peru, of Chile, of Argentina, of a lot of countries that after the elections in where the government starts, like the people starts like asking, what have we done? And I think still is the question, what is going on, those kind of dynamics, what's going under that? Because we are repeating and repeating and repeating. The last votings here in Latin America have the same pattern, the same pattern. It's not just the pattern about the hero that's going to save me. In a way, it's a pattern right now of resentment. It's like, well, he represents the way to a revenge of all the story. It's very, very difficult to see that.
And it is very difficult. I'm thinking in Europe here of the re-election of Orban in Hungary. Hungary is a country I love deeply because I lived there when I was a student. Even Poland, and it is very right-wing. And it's not about right-wing, it's becoming authoritarian. I started saying that many wish the pandemic to be nothing else than a bad dream, a nightmare. And one could say that the Russo-Ukrainian war could be another nightmare. The situation in South America, in many countries, your home country where you come from, Venezuela, is a nightmare. But nightmares will continue to appear and to wake up is in the middle of the night until the meaning is depicted. What is that we are missing? Nightmares come back when we're missing something, when we don't understand what they want to tell us. When looking at war, when looking at authoritarianism, dictatorship, abuse, what is that we don't understand?
For me, well, that's what I believe is what we are missing is, again, that we all are part of a whole. And we have to start it to see the other as part of myself, and to see the other as part of a great community is an effort. It's like, as Jürgen said, that to be conscious of is an effort, not to try to have all this irrational and unconscious issues, try to get into conscious and to assimilate it is an effort. And I think that what are we going through is that effort is, well, it's not easy. And I think that a lot of people is still struggling with survival, and they don't have the time, they don't have the energy, they don't have the way to start thinking in another way. So for me, in one part is the difficult to see us as a wholeness, and the other part we see it in well, Latin America is a very poor region because the imbalance between rich and poor, between, well, we are not talking about rich and poor, between people that have the security to assure the day life issues, and other that are struggling each day. Yes, the difference is amazing. And this very part of the collective doesn't have the psyche, doesn't have the way to see and to feel in another way. And in a way, they are struggling with the resentment, because in this different, it's impossible not to start thinking, well, why them and not me?
So there is a lack of a self-reflexive attitude that is stopped, and there is resentment. But I wonder whether this is exactly about the concept of a reset. War as reset, like a tabula rasa, that equals to peace as reset, but there cannot be peace as reset as saying, let's be peaceful, let's make peace, because it's a work in progress. In fact, this is confirmed by your words, but also what happened in 2008 in Washington when Obama became the president and he wanted a reset with Russia. And actually, he sent a present through the hands of Hillary Clinton to Putin, received by Lavrov, a reset button. Let's reset our relation. This is exactly what you said about the 50-year conflict in Colombia or anywhere else, even in a family, even between partners. After years of polarization, look at Israel and Palestine. There must be a long process that doesn't bring to reset, but bring to little developments. Actually, instead of developments, I would like to talk about the liberation process following Mary Watkins. Because, you know, it is true what my friend, sociological mentor said on an Italian newspaper. Mauro Magatti on the 1st of March said that by bringing war back to the heart of Europe, Putin has definitely broken the global liberal order that arose after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And then Magatti again points out Putin intends to test the West resistance. Following what you said and this wholeness, I think that it's so far, very far from what the German sociologist Ulrich Beck underlined or wished for, to move from a declaration of independence to a declaration of interdependence.
Yeah.
Cooperate or die. And these must be on a global scale, because again, otherwise following back the traumatic vulnerability of all and the consequent responsibility for all, including our own survival. Beck says that nationalism is particularly toxic, and he proposed for a cosmopolitan perspective. Thinking of nationalism, red, black, white, yellow, nationalism particularly toxic. I'm thinking of Jung and after the catastrophe, where he talks about Hitler and of course what happened in Germany. But isn't this also what is happening right now since the past 10 years with populism?
Yes, I think that is what's going on. Because if we see nationalism as a collective situation, it's the same thing as individualism. The nationalism is the equivalent of an individualism, but in a collective. No, it's like, well, we the Venezuelan are this in this way, or we the Colombian, or we the Germans, or we the Russians, or it's the same thing. It's just in one point is just an individual, the other is like a collective that is identified by that point of view or feeling or thinking. And I think that what we have to stop is that kind of forces that not try to stop. What we have to follow up is this kind of forces and this kind of attitudes. Putin has 20 years forcing a nationalism point of view of the Russian people and trying to again to have all to have all the yes all the lands that they have for many years. And I think that to see these things are very important because in a way in the polarization dynamic again is or we can see ourselves as a whole or I can just destroy you. Okay, I think that what's going right now,
the very patriarchal father, isn't it?
Yeah, yes.
The very patriarchal father. Either you do what I say, you are mine, otherwise I kill you.
Yes, and I think that's why this war is so important because the fear about global annihilation it arises again. So, well, I don't know how old are you, but we are almost
43.
I know. Well, you are in another generation, but I'm from the generation after the Cold War. But I still remind like the feeling and the fear about the nuclear ghost that it
Danger.
was. Yes, and I think what's going on, the really thing that why this war has been like a wow is the ghost of the Cold War, the ghost of the global annihilation starts again. And that's why this is so difficult to understand how after this pandemic that in a way it was like at the beginning with all the globe, the earth was struggling with that in a way where we are again with this fantasy of a global annihilation, but right now not by a virus, but by the mean of one man in this well the attitude of one man, and I think.
Please.
No.
I wanted to add an impermanence. When the pandemic started, I proposed that instead of talking about a suspension of time, we should talk about a suspension of certainties, the certainties of the daily life. And many leaders like Macron, the French president, was talking about we are at war. Well, now there is a real war. And because you mentioned the pandemic, I need your help. Because when the pandemic started, following this trend of interdependence, cooperation, cosmopolitanism, when I ran my series called Lockdown Therapy, which will become a book this summer by Routledge, I proposed that could be an opportunity to decelerate to look at the inner and outer balance, interiority, spirituality, the creativity of the soul, wholeness, becoming who you really are. But the truth is that I was wrong. I was naive. And Michel Houellebecq was right. Michel Houellebecq, when the pandemic started, the French author, said, the world at the end of the pandemic will be the same, only a little worse. I was naive and he was right. The world is the same, much worse.
I think that has to do with the difficulty that we have to reflect about what the things that happen when the pandemic started. For me, it was very clear that we don't have images to reflect about them, and we start a group to start building or sharing the different images that starts arising. There was a lot of apocalyptical images of invasion, chaotic images. And what we thought was our hypothesis was that these images will move in a way to start in a way that we can learn about what's going on. And I have the same feeling that you are talking about. I thought that after the pandemic, we'll be more respectful, we will be humble, we'll be more aware of our psychological.
Reflective, but we see globally there was just a wish to go out, get drunk, have fun, don't give a damn about the environment, and really not really in a bulimic way, ingest, vomit, ingest, without going through the full digestive process. That is how we get the nutrients from the food.
Well, and that is a symptom. It's a symptom, and it's a way to, in a psychopathological way, to understand what's going on. What you're describing is a titanic way, a titanic relation with ourselves.
And dissociations too, right?
Yes, the Titans. Well, Uranus and Cronus, they just ate and ate and ate. And that's why Cronus didn't realize that he ate a rock, and he didn't eat seals. He ate a rock, and he wasn't aware about that. He just followed it. Yes. Yeah. And that's the way that most of the people relate with their lives. They're always just swallowing and swallowing and swallowing without any kind of reflection, any kind of consciousness, without any kind of distance to ask what's going on over here. And just I swallowed it raw, and I can digest it. It's not a digestive process. It's not time to be aware of about what's going on. And the only thing that we can do is repeat and repeat and repeat. And I think it's a very pitiful thinking about us of humankind. But I think it's very important also to see that, well, that's the state in which a lot of people is right now.
What we're doing here is a very important exercise, thinking, instead of having opinion or borrowing opinions. So I think it's important not only to focus on Russia, but on a global scale. You are South American, you live in Colombia, you come from Venezuela. What is the difference between this war and the crap perpetrated by the United States since the end of World War II? Look at Vietnam, Iraq, Korea, we could go on. What about the US invasion and occupation or political destabilization since 1946 under the guise of liberating them? And since 1991 under the pretext of spreading liberal democracy globally? Maurizio Ferrara wrote on Corriere della Sera, an Italian newspaper, on the 7th of March, that the US invasion of Iraq, many commentators observe that the US invasion of Iraq was a predetermined carnage just like the one of the last 40 days in Ukraine, which took place after months of preparation. Ferrara reminds us that the Nobel Prize for Literature, Svetlana Alexievich, has drawn a very clear picture of the imperiality impulses not only of Putin, but also of a large part of the Russian population, the long wake of the Homo Sovieticus, and before that of the Tsarist tradition. But what about the imperialist impulses of the USA? Apart from the US, every time the British invaded and occupied a country, they created problems and civil wars once they left. For example, Kenya, Cyprus, Palestine, and they still occupy a part of Ireland. Are the action of the British Crown and the death they caused any different than those of Stalin, the US, or Putin? When colonial Britain occupied the countries and took everything from them, the capitalist US invaded countries for geopolitical reasons and for their goods. 4 days ago was the anniversary, the 40th anniversary of Malvinas, not the Falkland War, but La Guerra de las Malvinas. So again, the imperialistic crown against Argentina, or the US predominance on certain countries in the US. It's not only about Russia. It would be hypocritical to say, let's look at Russia and not look at everyone else. What is your thought in this regard?
Well, I'm not an expert in geopolitical or in this kind of stuff, no. But hearing you and hearing your question, I think that there are different situations. I think that what happened with the United States is they in a way they were like possessed by some kind of hero archetype. I think that they try to. It's if you see the nations of a family and brothers and sisters with different age, United States is one of the youngest states in the world. Okay. Yeah. But in a way, because they start like building in a way a little bit strong, it was rich, and I think that the role that they have in World War II was very important, because it was like, okay, now I'm sitting in the table with all these grown people and old people. I'm one of them. And it was very important because in a way they see or they feel or they because of them the allies won the war. It's like I have a very important role over the result of the war. And I think that at that moment they start like being some kind of hero, some kind of a guardian of mankind, and they start like feeling that they have the right way to see things. And that's why I feel with the right to go into another country that that could be dangerous to all the earth or to all the balance. And it is like a very surgeon way of view. In medicine, we laugh a little bit about there's we make a difference between the surgeon attitude and the psychiatrist attitude. The psychiatric attitude is more contemplative. It's like, well, let's see this thing, and the surgeon attitude is, well, if I have to, yes, let's do it. If I have to cut your hand, well, I have to cut your hand, and I'm not going to ask you how to feel about that. You have to be cut. And I think in a way is some kind of pretentious attitude that United States have all around the world. And I think that the reactions that they have about the acts, in a way, they have see that this resistance is in a way saying, I don't need your help. I don't need your opinions. I don't need you. That's what's happening in the relationship between United States and Latin America. Because for United States and Latin America, it was the backyard in which they move, and they have always like some kind of big brother attitude. No, I know better than you what's good for you, and all Latin America starts like a resistance about the interventions and this kind of relationship. And I think it has been a mistake, a United States mistake that have had a very, very high cost for their images and for their relations with all the rest of the states all around the world. And I think that after Trump, they are seeing that in another way. After Trump, that Trump was like the voice of that kind of attitude. I know better than you what is good for you, and well, but in a authoritarian way, and in this authoritarian way, what he get was a resistance and a very antipathical reaction.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's very I think that we must differentiate what we can call like imperialism of in the straight way to see it, a country or a man or a collective that want to go and to have a lot of colonials. And the other is this kind of psychological imperialism, in which what I want to do is to teach you. What I want to do is you don't know how to do things, I will do it for you. And we as psychotherapists, we know that the danger that implied that when you try to interfere or you try to intervene in some kind of psychological dynamic, a familiar one, a collective one, or individual one, you can. So it's very, very dangerous to do that, and it's very useless to do that.
Your words remind me of something I didn't know. I think I read 1 year ago or 2 years ago about the invention of Columbus Day, the 12th of October in the US, not in South America, in the US. It was a reparation from the Americans towards the Italian community. Not the discovery of America or South America because of Colombo, that came with the Spanish Empire. But the North Americans initially treated, the white North Americans, treated the Italians as black people or less white than them, like all the South America. Yeah. So what you're talking about is, the white man, the empire who is superiors, and look at everyone else that is less white than him in a way where, yes, you are going to provide me, you are going to be my backyard, and I can do whatever I want. I remember many, many years ago, I was a student at Cambridge University, and I went down to London, to the London School of Economics, because the president of the Italian Commission at the time, of the European Commission, was Romano Prodi, an Italian guy, our former prime minister. He was invited to talk about politics, so as an Italian myself, I went. And he was talking about a conversation he had with Clinton about Turkey. That was the time whether to include Turkey in the European Union or not, and because of culture was somehow not possible. They're not Europeans. And he said, of course, it cannot be proved, but it's interesting to connect to what you're saying. He said that Bill Clinton, who was president at the time, a few years before, said to Prodi, Romano, include Turkey in Europe the same way we included Mexico into the United States. Okay. And then he left the rest open. But this leads to another consideration, again, with the help of Maurizio Ferrara, who on the 7th of March wrote on Corriere della Sera, the war in Iraq gave an important shock to Europe In the wake of the massive street demonstrations, two great European intellectuals, Jürgen Habermas and Jacques Derrida, asked themselves the question, what binds Europeans together with respect to the international order? Their answer was a political mentality different from the American one and based on some common traits, an aversion to the use of force, first of all, and therefore an insistence in law and respect for the international legality, support of a global system based on liberal multilateral institutions and on human rights, fruit of past inspired by opposite principle and characterized by centuries of bloody carnage. Precisely, this mentality had to push Europe to build a foreign and security policy anchored to the EU, overcoming the stupid and simplistic opposition between war and peace. Talking about Turkey and Mexico, these values, and Ukraine and Russia and Europe, these values are very important because I believe Ukraine is telling us since 20 years now, we want to be European, not because we want BMWs, McDonald's or whatever, but because we want to be part of this group. That is the psychotherapist, not the surgeon group. So let's think there was too much blood. Let's have an attitude that is whole, comprehensive. Europe didn't listen to them, like the Turkish. You are not European enough. You are still too Soviet. And maybe with the Turkish is right if we look what Erdogan did in the past 10, 15 years. But the Ukrainians are telling us in 2008 and 2009, 2014 with the Maidan occupation of the square, in the Maidan Square, we don't want to be Soviet. We want a reset. And this reset is to be part of a society that is independent from someone else, a society that is healthy enough that every 4 or 5 years we can have an election and the president will govern for 4 or 5 years. Not like the authoritarian countries like Turkey, like Russia, maybe we include even Hungary and others, just to look at Europe. And an example I always make is the United States. The United States went through a very difficult time since Obama left office, through Trump and right now, but the institutions are healthy or healthy enough. It means after Trump, after Obama, someone was elected, Trump. After Trump, someone was elected, Biden. And although what happened in January 2021 in Washington, the institutions are healthy and can move on. In authoritarian countries, this doesn't happen.
Yes. And I think it's the basis of from which we can thought about what can we do. Again, making some kind of metaphor between our work and the work of the collective or the politicals. I think that it's very important to remind that political means to try to that power that we're talking at the beginning of our conversation is a reality, and we have to be aware of it, and we have to try to handle with, because if we don't handle with power, power will swallow us, all of us, power. Okay, so we have to give boundaries to power. We have to reflect power, and that's the work of a real political. That's the real work of a political, to try to balance power. One of the way that we have know about balancing power is the separation of the different forces that goes into power. That's why democracy still is, I think, that the healthy system that we can go on. And that's why I think right now the discussion is not about left and right things, or the things about authoritarianism as a proposal in which one man or a little group has the power to decide for a collective, or democracy, in which it's not that everyone is going to opinate and have a, it's not that way, but it's the way in which in democracy, the power is separate. The different columns, the different roots of power are separate. And I think it's the only way in which we, in a way, could guarantee that this kind of concentration of power can be so harmful for a collective and for all the states. And I still think that is the way, again, as psychotherapists, we can see Freud, for example, the difference for me is that's my point of view. One of the difference, the very important difference between Freud and Jung, it was that Freud was a patriarchal, authoritative psychotherapist. That's why when you don't agree what your psychoanalyst is saying to you, well, resistant, you have a resistance, well, but you have to go through the resistance because I know what's better for you. I know what's your truth, and you don't. The difference between Freud and Jung is that Jung, he asked himself, but this what I'm thinking or this what I'm believing is the truth of a Stefano, of a Eduardo, of everyone that I have, is the humble of questioning if I have the truth or the other one has a truth that I cannot see in this moment. And in a way, that's the root of democracy. Well, the difference between Turkey and in France, what are they have cultural differences, they have a difference in the religions, in the story. They have a lot of differences. Well, it's better to ask, well, through all this difference, can we sit in a table and talk and try to build something together? Or the situation is, I know the truth and you don't, and you form part of the club or not. And so all that the earth is like separate in different clubs in which there's a lot of, again, dynamics in which one wants to belong to one club, and the club said, well, you don't form part of this club. And there's, again, a lot of sympathies and non-sympathies all around the world in a very naive and superficial way. I think we must add all the cultural fields to our training programs to try to understand how civilization was built and the roots of civilization, the mistakes of the civilization, and not just to say, well, I have this system and you have to swallow it again raw. So you don't have to think about it. You don't have to feel about it. Just swallow it like a pill that I'm going to give you.
Eduardo, thank you very, very much. It was a beautiful, long conversation. I truly hope we can work together to reach a co-construction of meaning from the individual and collective point of view.
No, Stefano, thank you again for your invitation. For me, it was a pleasure, and I think these spaces are very, very important and necessary right now. I think that we need more of these spaces, and well, I will invite you to mine right now. I have also a space that let me thought about the theme, and we can again share another space and
pleasure.
Okay, well, bye-bye, Stefano.
Adios.
Bye-bye, adios.